Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you on the Dhamma. As human beings, we have this opportunity to transcend the realm of the animal and to attain to something very noble. The human being has great potential. Great potential to be noble, but it also has great potential to be very base. A human being can be much worse than an animal. At the same time, the human being can be so much more than an animal. The purpose of religion is to uplift the human being beyond the animal realm. The body is an animal body. No one can make the human body into anything else. It is the body of an animal. However, the mind is something very special. If it is trained, if it is developed, it can become the mind of a Buddha. It can become an enlightened mind, a liberated mind. Vimutti citta, the mind that is liberated from greed and hatred, selfishness, liberated from all ignorance, and truly peaceful. This is the human potential. But in order to achieve this potential, it requires work. It requires sincerity in training. No one can purify us. No one can defile us. We do it ourselves, for ourselves. And so the Buddha spent 45 years of his life after his enlightenment encouraging, teaching, giving advice, pointing out the way of training so that those who were inspired would try and follow and hopefully attain to the enlightenment that he had attained, to the freedom that he had attained, to the peace that he lived. And so those of us who have come into contact with this teaching and have been inspired by this teaching are now in the process of walking the path towards peace. And sometimes we may understand that peace is something far away, that peace is somewhere else. But the mind is the creator. Regardless of what the conditions are like now, the mind can be peaceful. And peace need not be far away. It can be right here, right now. In the midst of samsara, there can be peace. In the midst of noise, there can be silence. In the midst of activity, there can be stillness. This is why we endeavor to practice meditation, so as to have immediate access to peace, immediate access to stillness. When the Buddha taught of peace, we find in the scriptures mentioned three types of peace. Three types of quiet. First, there is the physical peace, physical quiet. And that is, we are in a quiet place, surrounded by pleasant conditions, pleasant environment, no disturbances, no pressure, not too hot, not too cold, not too much noise, not too much responsibility, very pleasant, natural environment. We call that a very peaceful setting. And when we go into such a setting, it does have an effect on us. It soothes our senses, makes us feel more calm. When we go into a forest, into a mountain, where there are a lot of green trees, green grass, the colors of nature are very soothing. The sounds of nature, the sounds of the birds and the wind and the leaves, the sound of the rippling brook. This is very soothing to the senses. It tranquilizes. We feel calm. In contrast, when we go into, say, a man-made environment, into a city, with motor cars, with buildings, with music, like man-made colors, or even just other people, like fashions, and all the intention and the effect is all to stimulate excitement in the mind. So we don't feel so peaceful, because the effect of the environment is to either irritate or stimulate, excite the mind, excite the body. So the Buddha recognized the advantage of living in quiet, secluded places, where and when possible. Appreciated the value of nature. This is why for the Bhikkhu Sangha in particular, he encouraged the monks that if at all possible, to live in forests, mountains, far away from the noise of the city, the town. A place where they can abide in physical seclusion for the purpose of developing peace. And this is very helpful in the beginning. It's very useful. But of course, you can't always do that. You can't always achieve that. And even if you find a very peaceful place, tranquil environment, beautiful trees, everything lovely, everything is very impermanent. Who knows what will happen? I've been living in Perth now for 9 years, and during the last 7 years we've been involved in building a forest monastery there, because I'm a forest monk. I like to live in a forest. I see great advantage in living in a forest. And so we've been developing this forest monastery. It's not that far from the city. It's accessible, but it's a forest. It's very quiet, and it can at times is very beautiful, because it's a big forest, undulating, hilly country with quite a lot of wildlife, a very peaceful environment, very tranquil, lovely. But everything is impermanent. So 3 or 4 weeks ago we had a very disastrous bushfire, or forest fire, as you may. Australian forests they call a bush. The bush, not the forest. So we had a bushfire, a forest fire, that swept right through the monastery. So now it's not such a beautiful place anymore. It's not such a lovely, soothing effect on the senses, because everything is black, lots of dust, very hot. The black forest. Other times we may go to a very quiet place and we think, oh, this is lovely, and then somebody comes and disturbs us. The neighbors move in, they like very loud music and put on their stereo. Or there's some young teenager who likes to have these very noisy motor cars. And they tune their motor cars and take off the muffler and rev the engine and make it very noisy, so that your peaceful setting is shattered. So that this type of peace, which is dependent on the environment, is very uncertain. It is useful, beneficial, desirable, but we can't always have it. And even when we get it, it's still very uncertain. We can't depend on it. And for most human beings these days, seeing that the population of the world is 5 billion people, and a good portion of these people live in cities, it's very hard to find that degree of tranquility and space. You live close together with a lot of noise. It's difficult to find and difficult to maintain the peace of tranquil environment. But it would be desirable if one can find it. It's very useful, but not a true refuge. So the Buddha encouraged us to seek for the quiet, the seclusion, the tranquil setting, but he knew the limitation of this. So then he taught a second aspect of peace. The peace that to some degree does depend on the environment being conducive, but not necessarily completely dependent. And this second type of peace is the peace that arises from concentration. In other words, the ability to withdraw the mind from the sensory stimulation, withdrawing the mind from the irritation and the exciting effect of the sensory world. Because we are sensitive beings. You are born as a human being with this body, which is a sensitive body. You have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body itself, and the mind that can think. And all of this makes you sensitive. You receive continuous stimulation. You hear, you see, you feel, taste, smell. So you're receiving continuous stimulation. And this is all right. This is what we want. That's why you are born as a human being, because you want to experience a sensory world. But it is possible to withdraw the mind and bring the mind to an inner cave, if you wish. We may not be able to go and live in a cave in the mountains. We may not even be able to go and live in a mountain. But we can withdraw the mind from the excitement and the stimulation of the sensory world. The process of withdrawing the mind is what we call concentration. Concentrating the mind on a meditation object. This is a systematic training of the mind, learning how to withdraw attention from everything else and bring the attention to rest, to focus, to collect with the one object, our meditation object. The meditation object can be one of many different things. It's not so important. But one of the most common objects is the breathing, experience of the breath. So that if we bring the attention, collect the attention on the breath, hold it on the breath, as the mind holds the breath, stays with the breath, the mind is not receiving so much stimulation. The mind becomes contained within that sphere, within that object. So the mind goes into a cave, if you wish. The mind goes into retreat, if you wish. The mind goes into its own area of rest. And this we can do once we are skilled, even in the midst of a city. Of course, in the beginning it does help tremendously to be in a conducive environment, like a tranquil setting, quiet place. It helps a lot, so as to develop the skill. It's like you want to build some muscles. You want to be strong and healthy and have lots of muscles and very fit. I mean, you can do it anywhere, but it does help to go to a gymnasium or one of these health studios where they've got all sorts of machines and you can just concentrate on doing that one thing. In the same way, when we want to develop this mental ability to withdraw, it does help to be in an environment which is not stimulating it, not irritating, an environment which is tranquilizing to us, so that the mind will become tranquil more easily. So it does help to have a tranquil environment in order to be able to develop the peace of concentration. But even in the midst of the city, it still is possible with patience to learn to withdraw, to allow the mind to collect and come to rest with the meditation object. This is a type of peace which is even more refined. As the mind collects on the object, as the mind stays with the object, becoming contented with the object, the mind begins to feel unburdened by the thinking process, unburdened by the anxiety about the past and the future, unburdened by all the complexity of thought, and not irritated by all the sensory stimulation, because we're not going out to them. We are staying with the object, we're collecting with the object, we are resting with the object of meditation. The mind begins to experience seclusion. Even in the midst of a city, the mind is in seclusion. The mind is collecting and resting, peacefully abiding. So that this is a very skillful thing for us to do, very useful thing for us to do. However, it requires a lot of skill. It requires a lot of patient training. It requires regularity, consistency of practice. But once we have the skill, once we know how to do it, it's a great help to us. It enables us to find our own cave without having to go to the mountain. It enables us to find our own quiet spot without having to go into the forest. It enables us to experience peace and coolness in the midst of our ordinary life. So it is a very useful thing to do, very beneficial. And it is for the purpose of developing this skill that we encourage people to do meditation retreats, to practice meditation as much as possible in their daily lives. However, even this type of peace is very impermanent, because you can't abide in this state of concentration all the time. Even if you concentrate for an hour, you still got to come out of your concentration. Even if you go on a meditation retreat for a weekend, you still got to go home afterwards. And even if we are quite regular with our practice of meditation, it doesn't mean that we can always attain to the same level of concentration. Because sometimes it's a good meditation and sometimes it's not so good. Even for meditators who practice regularly, if conditions external become very upsetting, if they are caught in some emotional trauma, then they can't concentrate. Then what? then we have no refuge, we have no peace. Actually, sometimes meditators suffer even more than non-meditators, because maybe at one time they have an experience of peace, and then they continually want to have that again and again, and when they can't get it, they get so upset, so frustrated. Sometimes on meditation retreats, people develop meditation, concentration, attain to a good state of concentration. Then something happens, sometimes for no apparent reason, and we say that concentration crashes. It crashes down. There's always good reasons, but it crashes. And once it crashes, they are so upset. Quite often tears, crying, because they've lost their concentration. Because concentration is impermanent. It depends on so many factors, and it can be disturbed. We can't always attain it. And especially in the lay life, where there are so many things, so many factors that affect you, so many relationships, so many disturbances that can affect you, that will make it difficult for the mind to withdraw, because now the hindrances are continually disturbing the mind. So this meditation, wonderful as it is, still cannot be a true refuge. Concentration is not possible to guarantee peace to us, because we can lose it. It can be disturbed. And people who don't understand this suffer terribly. They go on retreats, feel quite peaceful, and then go home, and then they start to become so irritable. They get so angry. Why? Because these people here are upsetting my meditation. When I was on the retreat, I could do this and I could do that. Now these people with their television and their radios and having to talk and having to relate and having to cook and wash, and that really begins to upset them, irritate them, and they get even more negative, more angry, less peaceful than before. This is a great shame. It shouldn't be like this. You must not allow it to be like this. Be very careful. It's not necessary. We understand the limitation of concentration. We understand that it is a conditioned state, that it depends on so many factors that we may not be able to control. We understand that the level of concentration will fluctuate. Maybe it becomes peaceful, maybe not so peaceful, maybe it's easy, maybe it's hard. We understand that. We do what we can. And this brings me to the third type of peace. In the scriptures they call it the peace that arises from the abandoning of defilements, the relinquishment of defilements. The mind that is freed from greed and hatred, the mind that is freed from ignorance, is a perfectly peaceful mind. There is nothing to disturb it, nothing that can disturb it, nothing that can delude it, nothing that can make it confused, nothing that can pull it out and make it react. The mind is at peace. An example of this are the Arahat, or the Arahants, the Buddha and the noble enlightened disciples. It's not that the Buddha is at peace when he's living in the mountain, and then when he goes into the city he gets upset. He wouldn't be a Buddha then, would he? It's not that he's peaceful when he's sitting meditation, concentrating, and then when he comes out of meditation he gets irritated. He wouldn't be a Buddha. The Buddha is at peace, full stop. There's no condition. There is no condition to his peace. The peace is, because the mind is no longer disturbed by anything, cannot be disturbed by anything, because the mind has relinquished every bias, every preference, every addiction. The mind is empty, and what is empty cannot be affected. So now, this is the ultimate goal, it's the ultimate state of peace. But of course, how do we live? How can we make use of this? Of course, if we are not as yet fully enlightened, we cannot realize this completely. However, there is something of this type of peace that we can use. If we understand that it is the peace that results from wisdom, the peace that results from not chasing, not fighting, not reacting, not creating a problem out of greed and hatred and ignorance. It is a peace that is natural to the mind, when the mind is not reactive. And this is a very crucial, fundamental teaching in Buddhism. The mind, in its original nature, is luminous, radiant, and peaceful. But the mind becomes tarnished, disturbed, corrupted, if you wish, by the defilements that arise within it. Those defilements are not intrinsic to the mind. They are guests in the mind. They arise in the mind and defile the mind. But by its true nature, the mind is pure and peaceful. And this is very important to understand this, because it gives us a perspective on what the lack of peace is. It's something extra that need not be there. My teacher, Venerable Ajahn, used to express this in a much simpler way. He used to say that the mind was like a leaf on a tree. When there is no wind blowing at all, the leaf is very still. No movement, peaceful. When the wind blows, the leaf starts fluttering about, becomes irritated. The natural state of the leaf is stillness. So now, with regards to the mind, if we look very closely, if we are able to observe closely with some degree of attention, awareness, we may begin to see how lack of peace arises in the mind. You see, we seem to look at the wrong place. We say, I want to be peaceful. Well, being peaceful is no problem. What you have to understand is why you're not peaceful. Why are you not peaceful? That's the problem. Because the mind should be peaceful. That is its original true nature. It's peaceful. So why is it not peaceful? What's the problem? Look there, in your own heart, in your own mind, right now. What's the problem? Why is the mind not peaceful? And if we look, we will see this movement of the mind, chasing, fighting, confusion. The mind is not peaceful because it is chasing something, fighting something, confused about something. You are sitting here right now, just sitting. Why is the mind not peaceful? Why shouldn't it be peaceful? You may be able to say, well, there are a lot of difficult situations in life. If somebody's trying to beat you up or cut your limbs off, it's hard to be peaceful. Well, all right, maybe that's a very hard test. Maybe you're not ready for such a test. But just sitting here on a chair, not even sitting on the floor, it's a bit more difficult when you're sitting on the floor. People can always complain that they've got pain. No, you're sitting here on a chair. It's not even very hot. You've got nice fans. Is the mind peaceful? There really is no excuse. There really is no excuse. If the mind is not peaceful, why isn't it peaceful? The mind becomes disturbed by the defilements that arise in it. The craving, the desire for something else than the present. The aversion towards what is in the present. Or just the confusion of the scattered, deluded mind. This is how lack of peace arises in the mind. We create it. We create the problem. We create the disturbance by allowing the mind to react with desire, with aversion. By allowing the mind to create a world of confusion, fear, anxiety. And because we create it, we can also stop creating it. And when we stop creating it, the mind is peaceful. This you must begin to see. It does not mean that you will be able to live it, but you must begin to see. You must begin to see it as a possibility. First we must have the vision of this possibility so that we can gradually begin to move towards it. I had a very interesting experience during my second year as a monk living in Thailand. Being a disciple of Venerable Ajahn was quite difficult because his monasteries are usually forest monasteries, and many of them in very remote areas, very poor areas of northeastern Thailand, which is a very poor part of Thailand. And being a Westerner, it was quite difficult for me, just physically, to adapt to those conditions. And even after having been a monk for a year and a half, it still was quite difficult for me, because I couldn't understand the language. So this year, my second year as a monk, Venerable Ajahn Chah sent me to a small branch monastery, quite a long way from the main monastery. And it was very remote, very austere, very poor, and very lonely. Because though there were other monks there, I couldn't speak very much with them. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. And one of the most irritating things, I could put up with everything else, but one of the most irritating things was that it was a new monastery. In other words, it was just a forest that somebody had offered and invited the monks to go and live there, and so there was a lot of work to do. And I did not want to do any work, because I thought that I'd become a Buddhist monk to meditate, not to work. And if I want to work, I'll go back and work for a living. And anyway, I didn't do all those years of study just to come here and do manual laboring, sweeping leaves, carrying earth, carrying water up the mountain, very hard manual labor for many hours of the day. And I found it very upsetting. And so it was a very miserable time for me, many months of misery. And I had great resentment. Then during the rains retreat, the 3 months rains retreat, Venerable Ajahn Chah went to visit this monastery where I was staying, and I was so happy. I was just so happy that I would be able to speak to my master. Even if I couldn't speak much Thai, I could at least say a few words. Beg him to take me back to the main monastery. So I was wanting to speak with him, wanting to get close to him. But because he was so famous and so well known, all the lay people, as soon as he arrived, all the lay people came. And that night we were sitting in the main hall, which is just a big open hall with wooden floorboards. And we sit on the ground, not on chairs, not so comfortable. And the Venerable, after the evening chanting, after the meditation, Venerable Ajahn Chah gets on the Dhamma seat and starts to give this talk to the lay people. And it's the northeastern part of Thailand. They speak more like a Lao dialect, not Central Thai. And I couldn't understand this at all, even less than the Thai. And in those days, Venerable Ajahn Chah was still healthy, and he used to give very long talks, hours. So I'm sitting there waiting, because I want to speak with him. We're all sitting there, and he's talking and talking and talking, and I'm getting more and more angry, more and more upset, because it's a long day. We get up at 3 a.m., and we go on this very long arms round to the village, down the mountain, and then coming back up. And because Ajahn Chah was coming that day, we spent all day working, cleaning up, clearing. And we only eat one meal a day, so by the time night comes, by about 9 o'clock, you feel very tired and very hungry. So I was sitting there feeling very tired, very hungry. And the mosquitoes in this place, they had so many mosquitoes. You could hear them coming at dusk. They'd come like a squadron. I can imagine what the Iraqi soldiers must be feeling with the American airplanes coming overhead. It was like that, these mosquitoes coming through the forest towards the light in the hall. So they come in big squadrons and attack you. Very painful mosquitoes. And sitting on the floor was very painful because I was still quite stiff. Even though I'd been a monk for a year and a half, it was still difficult for me to sit for hour after hour just on the wooden floor. It was very painful. And so I was sitting there and I was becoming more and more upset, more and more disturbed. No need to talk about peace that didn't exist. I was very resentful, very angry, all sorts of feelings, disturbance, just becoming hotter and hotter. And this continued for quite a long time, until eventually I noticed in what state I was in. I was sitting quite still, it was all internal, but this state of tremendous agitation, tremendous heat. The mind was in hell. This is what Avijji hell is like. The mind in turmoil. So it got to the point where I couldn't avoid but noticing, and I know this is suffering. Oh, this is really unpleasant. This is really suffering. Why am I in such a state? Until then, I was just caught in the mood, caught in the proliferation, caught in the negativity, caught in the resentment, thinking, hating. And then I woke up, as it were. I noticed, oh, this is a terrible state to be in. This is suffering. Why am I in this state? And immediately the reasons, one after the other. Well, I'm tired, I want to go to sleep. And Ajahn Chah shouldn't talk so long anyway. Don't even understand what he's saying. And it's not fair. We have to sit on this hard floor. These lay people, why don't they go home and leave us alone? All these reasons, just one after the other. I want this, I don't want that, I don't like it like this, it shouldn't be like that. And as I listened to this, I noticed, well, this is all desire and aversion. And it's all suffering. What about if I just stop? What happens? What will happen if I stop craving, stop being averse, stop reacting? The situation is just like this. In that present situation, I couldn't do anything. That was it. It was like that. And then I stopped, and the mosquitoes are not that bad. They come every night, so what's the difference? It's not that bad. And Ajahn, yes, he's talking for a long time, and the lay people seem to be enjoying it. That's good. They're deriving a benefit. What's wrong with that? I'll speak to him after. It's not that bad. The pain in the legs, I've endured this sort of pain before. I'm not going to be crippled. That's not a big problem. It's all right. Yes, I'm hungry, but I'll get to eat tomorrow morning. It's not a big deal. I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. Well, eventually I'll get to sleep. It's all right. I can endure a little bit more. And just beginning to use it, changing my perception and stopping the force of craving and aversion just by letting go. Stop creating the problem around the situation as it was then. In a very short time, my mind became very still, very peaceful. Not in concentration, just through accepting the present situation as it was. Just by not reacting and creating dis-ease, the mind came to its natural state, peaceful. Nothing had changed. The mosquitoes were still there, Ajahn Chah was still talking, the floor was still hard, I didn't get anything to eat, but the mind was peaceful. Oh, maybe this is what the Buddha means by suffering and the end of suffering. It is to be realized in the mind. We can realize it. Now, do not take this teaching to an extreme as if I'm implying that there's nothing to do in life. It is nothing to correct. No, there is things to do. We can improve situations. There is right, there is wrong, there is what is fair, what is skillful, what's not. But the immediate moment is a reality. Before you can deal with it, you must come to terms with this reality. This moment is like this. And in this moment it is possible to be peaceful. When the mind accepts this reality in the moment is like this. The mind can be peaceful. By not reacting with aversion, with craving, by not getting into confusion, by abiding in peace, by abiding in mindfulness, the mind is peaceful. And it is from that peaceful moment that we will be able to respond, that we will be able to deal with life with wisdom. It is only then that we are sensitive to life. It is only then that we can shape life and do the right thing. But if the mind is still in this state of confusion, reactive, craving and aversion, whatever we do usually will be wrong. Because it's coming from the disturbed mind, the crazy mind, the drunk mind. So this sort of peace is not far away. It is simply the changing of the attitude. It is simply changing the way the mind is responding, reacting to the situation as it is now. And we need to have a vision of this. And then we need to experiment with this. Try with little things. Don't wait till somebody captures you and they're torturing you. Don't wait for the big test. Try it on the little tests, the little things that you know you can deal with, you know you can endure. The little things. Somebody steps on your foot. Do you have to become angry, upset, irritated? Or is it possible to remain peaceful? The glass that you're using to drink your drink is knocked over and it breaks. And remember, to be peaceful does not mean to be irresponsible, does not mean that you will not be able to act, does not mean that you will not be able to do. It simply means that before the action the mind is sane, the mind is centered, the mind is awake, and so can choose what is the appropriate response. The mind is at peace with the present situation. So experiment with little things that happen in our lives. Can you be peaceful with the slight discomforts? You're driving along and you're in a hurry and there's another red light. Is it possible to be peaceful? If you can't do it in such an easy situation, then how can you possibly expect to do it in the much more difficult situations which will inevitably come to us? And there will be many, many situations which are unpleasant because the world is the way it is. Success, failure, praise, blame, birth, death, health, sickness, youth, old age, gain and loss. Unless we learn how to be peaceful, then we're going to be very, very vulnerable. And we're going to have to suffer a great deal. So experiment, have the vision of what is possible. The mind can be peaceful in the present situation, even with an uncomfortable situation. Experiment with it. Do it with little ones, little things. And then it will be possible to do it with bigger and bigger things. I had a disciple who lives in Melbourne, and she's been practicing meditation for quite a long time. And last year she wrote a letter to me. It was a very inspiring letter. She's not very wealthy and struggling a little bit financially, but she had a car, motor car, an old car, but it was quite reliable, and she was quite happy to have it. Very useful for her because she had many children, quite a few children to take to school. And then one night she parked her car in front of the house, and in the morning she went out and her car was all smashed up. It was smashed. Somebody had smashed it completely. So she wrote to me in this letter, when I went out and saw the car all smashed up, I had a very strange feeling. I wasn't terribly upset. I wasn't terribly distraught. It was just the car smashed up. I felt a little sad for the person who did that and had to live with that guilt. I think that meditation is having some effect on me, she wrote. Well, yes, I think it's a very good effect, isn't it? I mean, the car is there, it's smashed up. What choice have you got? Only two. Either you suffer in misery. Why do they smash my car? They shouldn't have smashed my car. Who did this? How can they let them do this? Resentment, anger, striking out. Why didn't the police stop these people? Then sorrow and depression. What am I going to do? No car. How am I going to survive? Panic. You can do all of that. But your car is still smashed up. It doesn't change the fact, does it? It just means that your heart is also smashed up. Your mind is also smashed up. Or you can, if there is this sort of understanding see the fact, the car is smashed up, it's a reality. It is smashed up, not it will be smashed up, it is, it's fact. You're not going to improve the situation by making yourself utterly miserable. You may as well not make the situation worse. Just the car is smashed up. Accept this fact. And don't allow the mind to sink into the depression and anger. We accept the car is smashed up. A great shame. And get on with living. Do what needs to be done next. So the mind need not become smashed up. The mind need not become disturbed with so much anguish. The mind can remain peaceful. But of course that's quite a difficult test, isn't it? So don't wait for your car to be smashed up, just smaller things maybe. Because if we can do it with one small thing, maybe with another one, and slowly we can do it with bigger things. Because even a car is not yet that big, is it? Sickness can be much more. The sickness of a loved one, child, husband, wife, and death, the inevitable for all of us, is a much harder thing to deal with. The death of a loved one. So that we need to work on this vision. Can the mind be at peace in the midst of samsara? Can the mind remain peaceful in the midst of the way things are in this imperfect world? This does not mean to become irresponsible, inactive, unproductive. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Don't misunderstand. It means to become peaceful in the moment so that then we can do what is possible. We can do what is appropriate. This sort of peace is not far away. It does not depend on being in a mountain. It does not depend on sitting meditation. It is something we can do with right view, right thought, right now. It is dependent on right view and right thought. It is dependent on our attitude and our understanding and the way we use the mind. And this is very, very useful, I think, for all of us. If we can only develop this vision and practice it, practice doing it, wake up and apply this wisdom. But if you're not awake, you cannot apply it. It does require being awake, otherwise we are just on automatic. Waking up means to be present with mindfulness, so that we can apply this understanding and allow the mind to remain in its rightful, peaceful state. So I offer these words for your encouragement in the hope that it will be of some value in your quest for peace. Thank you very much.